Do you believe the woods can speak? Lily turned to Mark as the car rolled down the narrow dirt path, the trees thickening like a wall of ancient sentinels on either side. Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, a nervousness she couldn't quite shake. The sun was setting behind them, casting the last rays of light into the dense forest ahead. Mark glanced at her with a smile, the kind meant to ease her mind. It's just the wind, Lil. You're reading too much into it. But Lily wasn't so sure. The trees looked different here, almost like they were watching, bending toward the road, blocking out the sky. It had been a spontaneous decision, an isolated cabin for the weekend, no neighbors, no cell service. But now she was starting to regret it. By the time they arrived, darkness had fully settled over the woods, and the cabin stood before them, a dark shape barely visible in the fading light. Lily shivered as they stepped out of the car. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, but there was something else, something unsettling, lurking just beyond her senses. They unloaded their bags in silence, the oppressive weight of the trees closing in. No birds sang, no wind rustled the leaves. It was too quiet, the kind of silence that felt wrong, unnatural. Lily tried to brush off the feeling, but her skin prickled with unease. As they sat on the porch after dinner, the quiet grew heavier. Lily found herself staring into the dark forest, her mind playing tricks. Were the trees closer than before? She leaned forward, squinting, her breath catching in her throat. Then she heard it, a soft whisper, almost imperceptible, drifting through the trees. Lily. She jerked upright, her heart pounding. Did you hear that? Mark looked up from his phone, frowning. Hear what? That voice. Mark shook his head. You're spooking yourself. It's just the wind. Lily stared into the woods, her skin crawling. It hadn't sounded like wind. It had sounded like her name, whispered from somewhere deep within the trees. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out strained. She couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were listening, watching. As they went inside to sleep, Lily kept glancing back at the forest, half expecting something to step out from between the trees. But nothing came. Hours later, she awoke to the sound of whispers. It wasn't the murmur of wind through the leaves. It was voices, dozens of them, all around the cabin, speaking in hushed tones. She strained to listen, her heart hammering in her chest. Lily, come to us. Her blood ran cold. She sat up, glancing at Mark. He was still asleep, oblivious, but the whispers were growing louder, more insistent. They circled the cabin, creeping through the walls like invisible tendrils. Lily, we're waiting. She clamped her hands over her ears, but the voices were inside her head now, pulling at her, urging her to step outside. She squeezed her eyes shut, trembling. This isn't real. It can't be real. But deep down, she knew the woods had called to her, and they wouldn't stop. The next morning, the tension between them was palpable. Mark shrugged off her fears again, but Lily couldn't ignore the whispers. As they hiked around the lake, she felt the eyes of the trees on her, heard the soft, distant voices beckoning. By evening, the sun was a pale disk hanging low in the sky, casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. As soon as the last sliver of light disappeared, the whispers returned, faint at first, like the wind brushing against her ears. But then they grew louder, clearer. Come to us. Come closer. Mark finally heard them too. Did you hear that? He whispered, his face pale. Lily nodded, her skin prickling with dread. It's been happening since last night. Mark's expression hardened. It's probably some kind of trick. Maybe locals messing with us. There's no one out here, she whispered back. No one knows we're here. But the voices persisted, wrapping around the cabin like a sinister lullaby, drawing them closer to the door. "Come into the woods," Mark paced nervously, glancing out the windows. "We should leave, first thing in the morning." Lily wasn't sure they could wait that long. The whispers grew more frantic as the night wore on, their tone shifting from a gentle beckon to a sinister demand. The trees outside seemed to press closer, the dark shapes moving just beyond the window panes. "We can't stay here," Lily whispered, clutching Mark's arm. Mark nodded, but before they could even reach the front door, it happened. The whispers stopped. A suffocating silence fell over the cabin. Lily and Mark stood frozen, staring at each other, too terrified to move. And then, from the shadows outside, a voice, clear, human, cut through the stillness. "Lily, Mark, let us in." It was no longer a whisper. It was a command, cold and demanding. The door rattled as if something, or someone, was trying to get in. The knob turned slowly, creaking under the pressure. Without thinking, they bolted for the back door. They ran into the night, the cold air biting at their skin, the whispers chasing them through the woods. The trees loomed over them, moving like shadows in the dark, their branches reaching out like twisted arms. The voices were everywhere, surrounding them, pulling them deeper into the forest. "Come to us. Come, come." They didn't stop running, but the whispers stayed with them, always just behind, just ahead, whispering promises of safety, of peace, if they would only turn back. But they knew better. The last thing Lily heard before the voices faded into the distance was a final chilling promise. "We'll be waiting. You can't run forever." This version introduces a sinister question from the outset and builds the sense of dread more quickly, letting the woods and their strange, malevolent nature seep into the atmosphere from the very first sentence.